I had an affair with a guy from rehab who relapsed while watching my kids, and when CPS took them, my husband never looked back. I threw away 10 years of marriage for someone who put my children in danger during his overdose, leaving Greg to fight for custody while I lost everything that mattered because I chose an addict over my family's safety. I'm Sierra, 29, was married to Greg, 31, for 10 years with 2 kids, Emma and Lucas. Greg worked as a paramedic and was devoted to our family, but I'd been struggling with prescription pill addiction that started after a back injury and spiraled into dependency I couldn't control alone. After months of hiding my addiction and lying about missing pills, Greg staged an intervention with my family and convinced me to enter a 30-day residential treatment program. I was angry and resentful about being forced into rehab, but I knew my addiction was destroying our marriage. The treatment facility was my first real attempt at getting clean, and I was terrified about facing my problems without the numbness that pills provided. I felt exposed and vulnerable, surrounded by people dealing with addictions that seemed worse than mine. That's where I met Martin, a charming guy around my age who was in treatment for heroin addiction. He'd been through multiple rehab programs and had a way of making everyone feel comfortable and understood, like he'd figured out how to navigate recovery better than the rest of us. Martin was confident and funny, always knowing what to say during group sessions and making people laugh during the most difficult moments of treatment. He seemed to understand addiction and recovery in ways that made him popular with both patients and staff. I was drawn to Martin's confidence and experience with the recovery process. He'd mentor newer patients and share insights about staying clean that made him seem wise and successful despite his history of relapses and multiple treatment attempts. Martin and I started spending time together during recreational activities and meals, talking about our addictions and the circumstances that had brought us to treatment. He was the first person who made me feel normal instead of ashamed about my dependency. Our conversations became increasingly personal as Martin shared stories about his past and listened to my fears about returning home to face Greg and the kids. He made me feel understood and accepted in ways I hadn't experienced since my addiction began. Martin was smooth and manipulative, always saying exactly what I needed to hear about recovery, relationships, and starting fresh after treatment. He made me feel special and chosen, like we had a unique connection that could survive the challenges of sobriety. The affair started during the final weeks of treatment when Martin suggested we were meant to support each other through recovery. The physical relationship felt intense and meaningful, like we understood each other's struggles in ways our families never could. Martin and I exchanged contact information before leaving treatment, promising to support each other's sobriety and maintain the connection we'd built. He made me feel like I had someone who truly understood the challenges I'd face returning to normal life. I completed the program and returned home to Greg and the kids, who were excited about my recovery and hopeful about rebuilding our family. Greg had been attending Al-Anon meetings and was committed to supporting my sobriety in whatever ways he could, but I couldn't stop thinking about Martin and the connection we'd shared during treatment. He understood my addiction and recovery struggles in ways Greg never could, despite my husband's best efforts to be supportive and understanding. Martin and I started texting regularly about our recovery progress, sharing struggles and celebrating milestones together. The communication felt necessary for my sobriety, like having someone who truly understood what I was going through daily. Greg was pleased that I'd found support in the recovery community and encouraged me to maintain connections with people from treatment. He thought my friendship with Martin was part of healthy recovery and didn't question our frequent communication. Martin suggested we meet for coffee to support each other's sobriety in person. I told Greg I was meeting with someone from treatment to work on recovery steps, which wasn't technically a lie but wasn't the whole truth either. The meeting felt electric and dangerous, with Martin telling me how much he'd missed me and how hard it had been to focus on recovery without our connection. He made me feel desired and important in ways that had nothing to do with addiction or family responsibilities. Martin and I began meeting regularly under the guise of recovery support, but our relationship quickly became romantic and physical. The passion felt intense and meaningful, like we were bonded by shared experiences Greg could never understand. I started lying to Greg about attending extra meetings, support groups, and recovery activities that didn't exist so I could spend time with Martin. Greg was so supportive of my recovery efforts that he never questioned my absences or additional commitments. Martin would tell me that our relationship was part of our healing process, that we understood each other's pain and could help each other stay clean in ways that outsiders couldn't comprehend. He made the affair feel therapeutic rather than destructive. The relationship continued for 3 months while I lived this double life. I was more affectionate with Greg to compensate for my guilt, but I was also pulling away emotionally as I became more invested in my connection with Martin. Martin started talking about us building a life together once we were both stronger in our recovery. He painted pictures of a relationship based on mutual understanding of addiction and sobriety that seemed deeper than anything I could have with Greg. But Martin began showing signs of instability and potential relapse. He'd miss our planned meetings, seem agitated and desperate during our encounters, and talk about struggling with cravings in ways that made me worried about his sobriety. Greg had to work a double shift at the hospital and asked if I could arrange childcare for the evening. I panicked and asked Martin to watch Emma and Lucas, thinking he was stable enough to help and that it would demonstrate our relationship could work practically. Martin seemed excited about meeting my children and proving he could be a positive influence in their lives. I introduced him as a friend from recovery who was helping our family, and the kids liked him immediately because he was fun and energetic. I left Emma and Lucas with Martin for 4 hours while I attended a work meeting, feeling guilty but also excited about integrating my recovery friend into my family life. I thought this was a step toward building the life Martin had been describing. When I returned home, I found Martin passed out on my living room floor with drug paraphernalia nearby. Emma and Lucas were hiding in their bedroom, terrified and confused about what had happened to the nice man Mommy had left them with. I realized Martin had relapsed catastrophically while responsible for my children's safety. He brought drugs into my home and used them while babysitting, potentially exposing Emma and Lucas to dangerous situations and substances. I called 911 immediately and then tried to wake Martin, who was barely responsive and showing signs of overdose. The paramedics arrived and administered Narcan, reviving him enough to transport to the hospital for emergency treatment. The police questioned me about Martin's presence in my home and his access to my children. I had to explain our relationship and how I'd left him alone with Emma and Lucas, realizing how terrible my judgment appeared to authorities. Greg arrived home to find police cars in our driveway and our children being interviewed by social workers about their experience with Martin. His face showed complete devastation as he processed what my poor choices had exposed our family to. CPS opened an investigation immediately, focusing on my relationship with Martin and the circumstances that had led to my children being supervised by someone who overdosed in our home. My judgment and decision-making were questioned extensively. Greg was furious and heartbroken, unable to understand how I put our children at risk by involving an addict from rehab in their care. He said my choices had endangered the people we'd both sworn to protect above everything else. The CPS investigation revealed that I'd been lying about my relationship with Martin and had introduced an unstable person into our children's lives without proper vetting or consideration of their safety. My recovery was being used to justify dangerous decisions. My kids, and when CPS took them, my husband never looked back. CPS removed Emma and Lucas from our home pending a full investigation into my judgment and decision-making regarding their safety. Even though Martin's overdose hadn't directly harmed them, my choice to leave them with an unstable addict was deemed neglectful and dangerous. The custody hearing was devastating as Greg's lawyer presented evidence of my affair with Martin and the circumstances that led to him overdosing while babysitting our children. The judge was appalled that I'd endangered my kids for a relationship with someone from rehab. I was granted only supervised visitation while Greg received temporary custody, with CPS monitoring all my interactions with Emma and Lucas. The court determined that my judgment regarding dangerous individuals made unsupervised contact inappropriate until I completed extensive counseling. Greg filed for divorce immediately after the custody hearing, using my affair and endangerment of our children as grounds for ending our marriage. He said he couldn't trust someone who'd put their kids at risk for a relationship with an addict. Martin survived his overdose but disappeared from the hospital before I could speak with him about what had happened. He'd apparently left town to avoid legal consequences and potential charges related to drug use in a home with children. The supervised visits with Emma and Lucas were heartbreaking and awkward. They were traumatized by finding Martin unconscious and kept asking why Mommy's friend had been sleeping on the floor and why strangers had to watch our family time now. My children started having nightmares and behavioral problems related to the trauma of Martin's overdose in our home. They needed therapy to process what they'd witnessed, adding another layer of guilt to the consequences of my choices. Greg's anger and disappointment were absolute. He said he'd supported my recovery and trusted me to rebuild our family, but I'd used that trust to bring danger into our children's lives through a relationship that violated everything recovery was supposed to teach. The CPS case remained open for over a year, requiring me to complete parenting classes, addiction counseling, and psychological evaluations to address my poor judgment regarding relationships and child safety. Every aspect of my fitness as a mother was scrutinized. I had to move back in with my parents, facing their disappointment and embarrassment about my choices and their consequences. They were heartbroken that their daughter had endangered their grandchildren for someone who'd nearly died in their home. My recovery was completely derailed by the stress and guilt of losing my children and marriage. I relapsed twice during the first 6 months after Martin's overdose, requiring additional treatment and making my custody prospects even worse. Greg started dating someone new within a year of our separation. Her name was Jennifer, and she was also a paramedic who appreciated his devotion to his children and had experience with trauma counseling. She helped Emma and Lucas process their experiences while I remained a supervised visitor. The children adapted to life with Jennifer faster than I'd expected. She provided stability and safety while I represented the chaos and danger that had traumatized them. They started calling her mom while I became the woman they visited twice a month. Martin had completely vanished after leaving the hospital, probably moving to another city to escape the consequences of overdosing while babysitting. He faced no ongoing accountability for endangering my children or destroying my family through his relapse. The dating world was impossible to navigate with supervised custody and my history of poor judgment regarding addicts. Most men weren't interested in someone who'd lost her children due to an affair with someone from rehab who'd overdosed in her home. 3 years later, I'm still working to rebuild some kind of relationship with Emma and Lucas through supervised visits and court-mandated programs. The judge reviews my case annually but shows little inclination to restore unsupervised custody given my demonstrated poor judgment. Greg and Jennifer married last year and officially adopted my children when I couldn't contest the proceedings due to ongoing CPS involvement. Emma and Lucas now have a legal mother who's been providing daily stability while I remain a visiting stranger. My addiction recovery has been complicated by the trauma and guilt of losing my family. I attend meetings regularly and have maintained sobriety for 18 months, but the emotional work of processing my choices and their consequences continues daily. The worst part is knowing that Emma and Lucas are genuinely better off with Greg and Jennifer providing the stability and safety I destroyed through my relationship with Martin. My children needed protection from dangerous people, not exposure to them. I threw away 10 years of marriage and my relationship with my children for someone who nearly died while responsible for their care. Martin's overdose could have killed him in front of my kids, traumatizing them permanently. The recovery community that was supposed to help me rebuild my life became the source of my greatest destruction. My affair with Martin violated the trust and vulnerability that treatment requires, using recovery as cover for dangerous behavior. Greg got justice and a partner who puts their children's safety first. Jennifer provides the stability and protection I'd failed to offer. My kids got parents who would never expose them to addicts or dangerous situations for personal gratification. The supervised visits are a constant reminder of how my choices affected innocent children who deserved better judgment from their mother. Emma and Lucas needed safety and stability, but I'd prioritized my relationship with an addict over their welfare. Martin disappeared without facing consequences for his role in traumatizing my children or destroying my family. His overdose in my home cost me everything while he moved on to probably endanger other families through his continued addiction. My recovery was supposed to rebuild my family, but I used treatment connections to destroy everything we'd built together. The program that should have saved my marriage became the place where I met someone who helped me lose my children forever. The affair felt meaningful and supportive during treatment, but Martin's relapse revealed how dangerous and unstable he actually was. I'd risk my children's safety for someone whose addiction was far worse than he'd admitted during recovery.